We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. The Miracle of Ravenswood. Chapter 1. The Discovery. England. Winter 1852. The snowstorm raged across the Yorkshire lands, transforming the landscape into a white and merciless desert. Adrian Blackthorne, 5th Duke of Ravenswood, rode alone through the tempest, his black horse struggling against the icy wind that whipped his face. At 34, the Duke was known throughout the county for his voluntary solitude and sombre temperament that had driven away most members of local society. Widowed for 5 years, Adrian had never had children with his late wife Victoria, a cold and calculating woman who had married his title more than his person. Her death in a riding accident had left the Duke even more isolated, withdrawn into himself in his immense Ravenswood castle, avoiding all company and repelling repeated attempts by his peers to find him a new wife. That evening, Adrian was returning from Harrogate, where he had spent 3 days settling affairs concerning his mining investments. He should have spent the night in town, but something had pushed him to return despite the approaching storm. Now, as the snow fell so heavily he could barely make out the path before him, he was beginning to regret this impulsive decision. That's when he saw it. Through the curtain of flakes, a dark shape stood out against the immaculate whiteness of a field. Adrian squinted, stopping to see better. What he discovered chilled his blood more than the Arctic wind assailing him. A woman lay in the snow, motionless, her dark clothes soaked and frozen. Around her, like pathetic shadows, 7 children of varying sizes had huddled against her body. Some crying silently, others so exhausted they seemed barely conscious. Adrian immediately dismounted and rushed toward the group. Up close, the spectacle was even more heartbreaking. The woman, about 28 years old, had a livid face and lips blue with cold. Blood had flowed from a wound on her temple and frozen on her cheek. The children, the oldest, couldn't have been more than 12. The youngest was a baby of barely 1 year, were in an advanced state of distress, their small bodies trembling with cold and exhaustion. "Madam!" Adrian knelt beside the woman, searching for her pulse. It was weak but regular. "Madam, can you hear me?" The woman moaned softly, her eyelids fluttering. When she opened her eyes of deep green despite the pain that veiled them, she looked at Adrian with an expression of terror. "No, please, not the children," she murmured in a broken voice. "Madam, I am the Duke of Ravenswood," said Adrian gently but firmly. "You are on my lands. Tell me what happened." The woman tried to sit up, grimacing in pain. "My children. They're so cold. I beg you." "We'll take you all to the castle," said Adrian without hesitation. "You need medical care." "No!" The woman seized his arm with surprising strength for someone in her condition. "You don't understand. We are nothing. We have nothing to offer you in return." Adrian looked at this brave woman who, even wounded and half dead with cold, still worried about her children and apologized for bothering a duke. Around them, 7 little faces looked at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor. Eleanor Hartwell," she whispered. "And my children. Thomas, Mary, Sarah, James, Peter, little Anne, and the baby. William." Adrian quickly assessed the situation. The storm was worsening, night was falling, and this small group wouldn't survive another hour outside. His decision was made in an instant. "Thomas!" He addressed the oldest boy, a lad with brown hair and brave eyes despite his terror. "You're the man of the family now. Help me get your mother onto my horse." He lifted Eleanor carefully, noting that she was dangerously light, then placed her across his saddle. Then, In a manner that would have scandalized any aristocratic observer, the Duke of Ravenswood began installing the children, the smallest in front of and behind Eleanor, the largest clinging to the stirrups and straps. "Hold on tight," he ordered, taking the reins. "The castle is only a mile from here." The journey to Ravenswood was a nightmare. Adrian had to practically carry the horse and its precious cargo against the wind, stopping regularly to make sure no child had fallen. When they finally reached the castle courtyard, he was soaked, frozen, and exhausted, but determined. "Henderson!" he roared toward the stables. "Mrs. Peterson, everyone outside, immediately!" The butler and housekeeper appeared, followed by several servants who stopped short upon seeing their aristocratic master covered with snow, carrying an unknown woman and surrounded by 7 miserable children. "Your Grace," stammered Henderson. What is—" "This family needs immediate help," declared Adrian in a tone that brooked no discussion. "Mrs. Peterson, prepare the family suite in the East Wing. Henderson, send for Dr. Morrison immediately. I want hot baths, dry clothes, and food for these children, now." Mrs. Peterson, a middle-aged woman with a motherly face, looked at the children with immediate compassion. "Of course, Your Grace. Come, my little ones. We'll take care of you." But Henderson, faithful butler for 20 years, couldn't help but remark, "Your Grace, the family suite. That's where your distinguished guests used to stay. These people are—" Adrian turned toward his butler with an expression that would have frozen fire itself. "These people, Henderson, are my guests, and they will be treated as such. Have I made myself clear?" "Perfectly, Your Grace," Henderson replied with a bow, though his perplexity was evident. As Adrian carried Eleanor toward the castle, followed by the procession of children and servants, he had no idea that this impulsive act of compassion would transform not only the life of this desperate family, but also his own, and forever revolutionize the atmosphere of Ravenswood Castle. For sometimes, all it takes is one gesture of kindness in a storm to change the course of several destinies. Chapter 2. The Awakening. 3 days had passed since the dramatic arrival of Eleanor and her 7 children at Ravenswood Castle, in the family suite of the East Wing, sumptuous apartments that had not welcomed guests for years. A remarkable transformation was taking place. Eleanor regained consciousness slowly, emerging from deep, restorative sleep for the first time in weeks. The pain in her temple was still present but bearable, and she felt warm. This simple luxury, which she had almost forgotten, made her open her eyes. What she saw astounded her. She found herself in an immense bed with blue silk sheets, in a room with mahogany-paneled walls, adorned with master paintings. Velvet curtains filtered the golden morning light, and a fire crackled cheerfully in a carved marble fireplace. It was more luxurious than anything she had ever seen, even in her privileged youth. "My children!" she cried suddenly, trying to sit up despite the dizziness that assailed her. "They're fine, madam," said a gentle voice near the window. Eleanor turned her head to see a middle-aged woman with a kind face who rose from a chair where she seemed to have spent the night. She wore the impeccable uniform of a great house's housekeeper. "I am Mrs. Peterson, His Grace's housekeeper," explained the woman, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" "My children," Eleanor repeated urgently. "Where are they? Are they well?" "They're doing wonderfully," Mrs. Peterson reassured her with a smile. "They're still sleeping in the room next door. Dr. Morrison examined them all last night. Apart from some minor frostbite and understandable exhaustion, they're in good health." Eleanor closed her eyes in relief, tears flowing down her cheeks. "Thank God. I thought we were all going to die in that storm." "The Duke found you just in time," said Mrs. Peterson, adjusting Eleanor's pillows. "A little later and, well, Let's not think about that. You're safe now." "The Duke," murmured Eleanor. "I vaguely remember. A man on a black horse. But why did he bring us here, to such luxurious apartments? We're only—" "You are his guests," Mrs. Peterson interrupted firmly, "and he was very clear that you should be treated as such." At that moment, children's voices echoed from the next room. Laughter. Eleanor hadn't heard her children laugh in weeks. "May I see them?" she asked. Mrs. Peterson opened the connecting door, and Eleanor felt her heart swell with joy. Her 7 children, clean, dressed in new clothes and with radiant faces, were having breakfast around a large table. Baby William, installed in an ornate high chair, was babbling joyfully while gnawing on a piece of bread. "Mama!" cried Mary, her 8-year-old daughter, rushing toward the bed. "You're awake! Oh, Mama! It's like a fairy tale palace!" Soon all the children surrounded her, all talking at once about their adventures of the past 3 days. Thomas, her eldest son, proudly explained how the Duke himself had come to see them every morning to make sure they were well. Sarah, 6 years old, babbled about the beautiful dresses Mrs. Peterson had found for them. The twins, James and Peter, 5 years old, described with wonder the horses they had seen in the stables. "And the Duke told us we could stay as long as we want," added little Anne, 4 years old, climbing onto the bed to cuddle her mother. Eleanor looked at her children with a mixture of love and worry. They looked so happy, so normal, as if they had forgotten the terrible weeks they had endured before the Duke found them. "Mrs. Peterson," she said when the children had returned to their breakfast, "I must see the Duke. I must thank him and understand what he expects from us." "He's waiting for you for lunch, if you feel up to it," replied the housekeeper. "He has been very concerned about your health." An hour later, dressed in a simple but elegant dress that Mrs. Peterson had found for her, Eleanor descended the grand staircase of Ravenswood Castle. Her legs were still weak, but her determination was firm. She had to understand why this Duke, this man she didn't know, had shown such kindness toward her and her children. She found him in the library, standing near a window that looked out onto the snow-covered gardens. When he turned toward her, Eleanor was struck once again by his bearing, tall, with black hair slightly silvered at the temples, with grey eyes of piercing intelligence. But what surprised her most was the kindness she read in them. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said with a slight bow, "how are you feeling?" "Thanks to your kindness, much better, Your Grace," Eleanor replied with a curtsy. "But I must tell you, we cannot stay here. We have no way to pay for your hospitality and—" "Please sit," Adrian interrupted gently, "and allow me to tell you something." Eleanor took the seat he indicated, her hands trembling slightly. "Mrs. Hartwell, when I found you in that storm with your children, I saw something that profoundly marked me," began Adrian. "A mother who, even wounded and dying of cold, thought only of her children. A family that held together in the face of adversity. It reminded me of what I had lost." Eleanor looked at him attentively, sensing the pain behind his words. "I was married, you see," continued Adrian, "but my wife and I never had children. And when she died, this castle became empty, dead, until your arrival. Your Grace, these past 3 days," said Adrian with a smile that completely transformed his austere face, "I have heard laughter in these corridors for the first time in years. Your children have brought a life, a joy, that these walls had forgotten." Eleanor felt her heart tighten. "But we cannot. We have no right." "Mrs. Hartwell," said Adrian, leaning toward her, "would you do me the honor of telling me your story? How did you find yourself alone with 7 children in a snowstorm?" Eleanor hesitated, then, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, began to speak. She told him about her privileged youth as the daughter of a respected pastor, her marriage to Robert Hartwell, a good but imprudent man who had invested their savings in risky ventures. His sudden death from fever had left Eleanor with 7 children and crushing debts. "We lost our house 6 weeks ago," she explained, tears in her eyes. "Since then, we've been wandering from village to village looking for work, shelter, anything. The night you found us, we were fleeing Harrogate. There had been an incident. Men who thought that a woman alone with children." Adrian felt cold anger wash over him. "Did these men harm you? I was injured while fleeing, but the children are safe. That's all that matters." Adrian looked at her, this brave woman who had sacrificed everything to protect her children, who even now worried about inconveniencing a duke when she had nearly died. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said finally, "I have a proposition for you, a proposition that might seem shocking to some, but which seems perfectly sensible to me." "Your Grace." Adrian rose and went to his desk, from which he took several documents. "I offer you employment," he said simply, "a permanent position here at Ravenswood Castle." Eleanor looked at him with astonishment. "Employment? But as what? Servant? Governess?" Adrian smiled, a smile that would soon shock all the castle staff and cause scandal in Yorkshire. "No, Mrs. Hartwell," he said calmly. "As Chatelaine of Ravenswood, my partner in managing this estate, and if you accept, as mother to my adopted children." The silence that followed this declaration was so profound you could have heard a pin drop. Eleanor looked at the Duke as if he had lost his mind. "Your Grace," she whispered, "you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious in my life," Adrian replied, "and what I'm going to propose to you now will truly shock everyone." Chapter 3. The Revolutionary Decision. Eleanor looked at the Duke of Ravenswood as if he were speaking a foreign language. "Your Grace, you cannot. You cannot adopt my children, and I cannot become Chatelaine. I'm only a penniless widow." "You are much more than that," Adrian interrupted firmly. "These past 3 days, I have observed your children. Thomas, your eldest son, has more maturity and sense of responsibility than most young gentlemen I know. Mary spontaneously helps Mrs. Peterson with the little ones. Sarah sings to comfort the baby when he cries. All your children are polite, intelligent, and of remarkable kindness. This doesn't come by chance, Mrs. Hartwell. This comes from the education you have given them." Eleanor felt tears rise to her eyes. "You are too kind, but—" "I am not kind," said Adrian, with an intensity that surprised her. "I am selfish. Since my wife's death, this castle has become a mausoleum. My servants walk on tiptoe, I take my meals alone in deathly silence, and my days stretch in a solitude that eats away at me. Your children have brought here something that money cannot buy, life." He walked to the window, looking at the gardens where Thomas and Mary were building a snowman under the watchful supervision of a valet. "Yesterday morning," he continued, "I woke to the sound of your children's laughter. For the first time in 5 years, I wanted to get up to start the day. You understand what that represents for a man who had forgotten what hope was." Eleanor rose, approaching him. "Your Grace, I understand your loneliness, but you're idealizing our situation. My children are not angels. Thomas can be stubborn. Mary sometimes has terrible tantrums, the twins are rascals, and little Anne has nightmares since her father's death." "And that's exactly what I want," said Adrian, turning toward her. "A real family with its joys and difficulties, not the icy perfection I knew with Victoria." He returned to his desk and took out other documents. "I have spent these 3 days consulting my lawyers," he explained. "Adoption is possible. I can legally become the guardian of your 7 children, give them my name, ensure them an education and future worthy of their intelligence." "But society," protested Eleanor, "a duke who adopts the children of an unknown widow." "Society can go to hell," Adrian replied with a vehemence that made her start. Forgive me, but I'm tired of social conventions. I have lived according to their rules for 34 years, and it has brought me nothing but bitterness and solitude." He approached her, his grey eyes bright with determination. "Mrs. Hartwell, your children deserve better than wandering and poverty, and I need them as much as they need me." "And me?" asked Eleanor softly. "What would be my role in all this?" "The one you already occupy," Adrian replied simply. "Their mother. The woman who raised them with so much love that they became extraordinary beings. You would be my partner in their education, my advisor in managing the estate, my—" He stopped, seeming to search for his words. "Your what, Your Grace?" "My family," he said finally. "Not in the romantic sense," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "I'm not asking anything personal from you, but a family in the true sense of the term. People who support each other, who share joys and sorrows, who give meaning to existence." Eleanor looked at him for a long time, trying to understand this complex man who was offering her the impossible. "Your Grace, even if I accepted, even if this madness were possible, what would your peers say? Your family, your friends?" Adrian had a bitter smile. "My family consists of a few distant cousins who are only interested in me for my inheritance. My friends are leeches seeking my influence or money. As for my peers—" He went to the fireplace, looking at the flames. "Do you know what they said when Victoria died? They offered me their daughters, their nieces, their wards, not out of compassion for my solitude, but because I had become a good match again. They only see in me a title and a fortune. And you think I'm different?" Adrian turned toward her with an expression of overwhelming sincerity. "Mrs. Hartwell, when I found you dying in the snow, your first thought was not for yourself, but for your children. Yesterday, when Dr. Morrison examined you, you refused to let him give you a sedative for pain, for fear of not being able to watch your children. This morning, your first concern was to thank me and find a way to repay me." He approached her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You don't see in me a title or fortune. You see the man who saved your children, and you want to make sure he doesn't regret his gesture. That's true nobility, Mrs. Hartwell. Truer than all the hereditary titles in the world." Eleanor felt her heart tighten. This powerful man, who possessed everything the world could offer, was lonelier than she had ever been. "Would your children miss you if you had to leave them?" she asked softly. "Terribly," Adrian admitted without hesitation. "In 3 days they have become my children, in my heart, if not by blood. And if I accepted this insane proposition, what would really happen? How would it work day to day?" Adrian returned to his desk and spread out what looked like architectural plans. "I was thinking of renovating the west wing of the castle," he explained. "Create connected but independent family apartments. Your children would have their own bedrooms, a classroom, a playroom. You would have your own apartments with a private salon where you could receive your friends." "What friends?" Eleanor interrupted with a sad laugh. "Your Grace, I have nothing left. No family, no friends, no social position. I would only be an intruder in your world." "Then we'll create a new world," said Adrian with a conviction that made her shiver. "A world where what matters is not birth or fortune, but kindness and authenticity." At that moment, cries of joy echoed from the gardens. Through the window they saw Thomas helping his brothers and sisters sledding on a small slope, while Mrs. Peterson and several servants watched them smiling. "Look at them," murmured Adrian. "Look how they make even my servants happy. My staff hasn't smiled like that in years." Eleanor looked at her children, so happy, so carefree for the first time in months. Then she looked at Adrian, this mysterious man who was offering her the impossible. "Your Grace," she said finally, "if I accepted, if this madness became reality, what would you expect from me in return?" Nothing, Adrian replied immediately. Everything. I don't know. I only know that for 3 days I've felt alive for the first time in years. Eleanor closed her eyes, weighing this decision that would forever change her life and that of her children. There is one condition, she said finally. Which one? I want my children to keep their father's name. They can bear yours in addition, but never in replacement. Robert Hartwell was a good man, and his children must honor his memory. Adrian smiled, the first real smile Eleanor had seen from him. Then they will be called Hartwell Blackthorne, and they will be proud of both their heritages. In that case, said Eleanor, extending her trembling hand, I accept your insane proposition, Your Grace. Adrian, he corrected, taking her hand. If we're to be a family, call me Adrian. And as they shook hands in the library of Ravenswood Castle, neither could imagine that this revolutionary decision would not only transform their lives, but also create one of the most extraordinary families in Victorian England. Chapter 4. The Transformation. 6 months later, Ravenswood Castle was unrecognizable. What had been a silent mausoleum had become a living home, resonating with children's laughter, animated conversations, and that particular warmth that is born when a building shelters a true family. The West Wing had been entirely renovated according to Adrian's plans. Eleanor's apartments overlooked the gardens where her children played every day, supervised by staff who cherished them as if they were of royal blood. Thomas had his own student room with a personal library. Mary had a music salon where she took piano lessons, and the little ones shared bedrooms decorated like fairy tale palaces. But the real transformation was not in stone and mortar. It was in souls. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her chamber, adjusting her green silk gown. Tonight, Adrian was giving his first reception in years, and for the first time, she would be at his side as the official chatelaine of Ravenswood. The idea terrified her as much as it excited her. "Mamma!" Mary burst into the room, radiant in her blue velvet dress. At 9, she had acquired the confidence of a young lady while keeping her childlike spontaneity. "Papa Adrian says the orchestra has arrived, and there are already 3 carriages in the courtyard." Eleanor smiled, hearing the nickname her children had naturally given the Duke. They never called him Your Grace, or even simply Adrian. For them, he was Papa Adrian, and this title suited him perfectly. "Has Thomas finished dressing?" asked Eleanor. "Yes, and he's very elegant. Henderson says he looks like a real little lord." Indeed, Thomas, now 13 years old, had become the portrait of a young gentleman. Adrian had insisted he receive the education of a future duke, with tutors in Latin, mathematics, history, and fencing. But more importantly, he personally taught him the responsibilities that accompany privilege. "Come," said Eleanor, taking Mary's hand. "Let's see if Papa Adrian needs us." They found Adrian in the Grand Salon, supervising the final preparations with Mrs. Peterson. In 6 months, he too had changed. The dark and solitary man had given way to someone warmer, more open. He smiled more often, laughed regularly, and this physical transformation was stunning. "Eleanor!" He approached her, and as always, she was struck by the sincerity of the affection in his eyes. "You look magnificent." "Thank you," she replied, blushing slightly. Their relationship had remained strictly platonic, but the mutual affection and respect had deepened each day. "The guests are beginning to arrive," Adrian explained. "I admit I'm nervous. It's the first time I've entertained since very long. And it's the first time I'm playing the role of chatelaine," added Eleanor. "We'll learn together." "Mama, Papa Adrian!" Thomas appeared in the doorway, impeccable in his evening attire. "Lord and Lady Pemberton have just arrived, and they look surprised." Adrian and Eleanor exchanged an amused glance. They knew this evening would be a test. Local society had come out of curiosity as much as politeness, impatient to see this adopted family that was causing so much gossip. "Very well," said Adrian, offering his arm to Eleanor. "Let's show them what a real family is." They entered the reception salon together, followed by Thomas and Mary. The effect was immediate. Conversation stopped, and all eyes turned toward them. Lord Pemberton, a corpulent man with very set opinions, was the first to approach. "Ravenswood," he said with forced joviality. "What a pleasant surprise to see you back in society." "Pemberton," Adrian replied politely, "allow me to present Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the chatelaine of Ravenswood, and her sons Thomas and Mary." The silence that followed was eloquent. Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell. Not Lady Eleanor, and these children presented as if they were family. Lady Pemberton, a dry woman with a piercing gaze, examined Eleanor from head to toe. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said in an icy tone, "how interesting. And your other children?" "They're sleeping," Eleanor replied calmly. "The younger ones go to bed early." "Of course," said Lady Pemberton with a condescending smile. "And tell me, my dear, how do you find managing a castle of this importance?" Eleanor sensed the trap in the question, but before she could respond, Thomas intervened with a maturity that surprised everyone. "Mrs. Hartwell manages Ravenswood with remarkable efficiency," he said, politely but firmly. "Papa Adrian always says she has transformed this house into a home." "Papa Adrian," repeated Lord Pemberton, frowning. "That's what my children call me," Adrian explained with a smile, "and I'm very proud of it." The evening continued, punctuated by tense conversations and curious glances, but gradually something remarkable happened. Thomas charmed the guests with his intelligence and courtesy. Mary, invited to play the piano, captivated the assembly with her talent, and Eleanor, despite her initial nervousness, revealed a natural grace and intelligence that impressed even the most skeptical. But it was the incident with little Anne that really changed the atmosphere. Around 9 o'clock, the 5-year-old girl appeared at the top of the grand staircase in her nightgown, her eyes puffy with sleep and holding her rag doll. "Mama!" she called in a small voice. "I had a nightmare." An embarrassed murmur ran through the assembly. This was exactly the kind of situation the guests expected, proof that this adopted family didn't know how to behave in society. But Adrian immediately climbed the steps, lifted Anne in his arms with evident tenderness. "What frightened you, my darling?" he asked softly, completely ignoring the audience's gazes. "I dreamed we were in the snow again," whispered Anne, snuggling against him. "But you're safe now," said Adrian, rocking her. "You're home, with Mama and Papa Adrian and all your brothers and sisters." "You're staying with us forever?" asked Anne. "Forever," Adrian promised, kissing her forehead. And it was at that moment that Lady Pemberton, this stone-hearted woman, felt her eyes mist with tears. "My God," she murmured to her husband, "look how he loves her. Look how that child trusts him." The rest of the evening unfolded in a completely different atmosphere. The guests, witnesses to this authentic love between a duke and a child, not of his blood, began to understand that what they were seeing was not a scandal, but a miracle. Later, when all the guests had departed and the children were in bed, Eleanor and Adrian found themselves in the library, exhausted but satisfied with this successful evening. "I think we succeeded," said Eleanor, collapsing into an armchair. "Thanks to you," Adrian replied, "and to our children. They were perfect." "Our children," Eleanor repeated with a smile. "I love when you say that." "That's what they are," said Adrian simply, "in every sense of the term." He went to his desk and took out an official document. "The adoption papers are finalized," he announced. "Legally, officially, Thomas, Mary, Sarah, James, Peter, Anne, and William are now Hartwell Blackthorns." Eleanor felt tears rise to her eyes. Adrian, how could I ever thank you? By continuing to be who you are, he replied, by continuing to make this house a home, by continuing to raise our children with the love and wisdom you have always given them. He paused, seeming to hesitate. Eleanor, may I tell you something? Of course. These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life. You and your children have given meaning to my existence. You have transformed an empty castle into a home, a lonely man into a father, a hollow title into a responsibility full of joy. Adrian, I know our arrangement was supposed to be practical, he continued, but I hope you too are happy here. Eleanor rose and approached him, gently placing her hand on his. Adrian, 6 months ago, my children and I were destined to die in that storm. You not only saved our lives, but you gave us a new life. My children have a father who adores them, an education that will open all possible futures, and a home where they are loved unconditionally. And you? He asked softly. Eleanor smiled, her eyes bright with emotion. And I found something I thought I had lost forever. A family, not just for my children, but for me too. As they stood there in Ravenswood's library, surrounded by the peaceful silence of a house where 8 happy souls slept, Adrian and Eleanor knew they had created something extraordinary. Not a marriage of romantic love, but something perhaps more precious still, a chosen family, united by affection, respect, and mutual commitment to protect and cherish what they had built together. The act that had shocked the Ravenswood estate had become its greatest blessing. Epilogue. The Legacy. 10 years later, Ravenswood Castle had become legendary throughout Yorkshire, not for its riches or architecture, but for the extraordinary family that inhabited it. Thomas Hartwell Blackthorne, now 23 years old, managed the duchy's estates with a competence that impressed even the most experienced businessmen. Mary had become an accomplished pianist and taught music to children from surrounding villages. The twins, James and Peter, were studying at Oxford. Anne showed remarkable talents for painting, and William, the little boy Adrian had found as a baby in the snow, had become an intelligent and joyful 11-year-old who considered the Duke his true father. Eleanor, now 38 years old, had become one of the most respected women in the county, known for her wisdom, kindness, and remarkable ability to transform the lives of all those she met. And Adrian, the solitary duke who had found a family in a snowstorm, had become the happiest man in England. Their story was told in London salons as proof that true love, whether romantic or familial, could be born from the most improbable circumstances and transform the most broken souls. For sometimes, all it takes is opening one's heart to the unexpected to discover that the greatest miracles are born from the simplest gestures of kindness.